players get into team preview as they are finding each other. That came very close to winning the World Championship, but right now doesn't have its Mega Stone available to it in the Gengar. So Nick Navarre will be on the bottom of your screen once we get into the match. Right now he's on the left and Brandon Huang on the right and / top. Nick has Gengar, Groudon, Venusaur, Xerneas, Serena, and Incineroar, as Brandon has Tapu Koko, Lunala, Kyogre, Kartana, Incineroar, and Terrakion.
Yeah, so I think, Joe, if you're, we'll say, a student of the game, there's one Pokemon on each team that kind of jumps right out at you. Of course, the first one is the Gengar that is on Nick's team, and we've seen that kind of be an adaptation. I was talking to a couple players that have teched that Gengar onto that Tornadus Kyogre team that we've seen a lot of. Sometimes it has Focus Sash, and of course now it does have access to Z moves, and Ghostium Z being one of the more popular options. It hits a lot of things very hard, is only really resisted in the format by Incineroar, and of course it gives you a nice favorable roll onto Lunala through Shadow Shield. Very powerful attack. And it does a lot of good things. And then, you know, we saw with Mimikyu in past formats that with that Ghostium Z, you get the option to run Destiny Bond, which is really cool as a form of redirection. And then on the flip side, that other Pokemon that is definitely coming right out at you is that Terrakion, which is something that we really haven't seen in a format since like 2015 when it got a little bit of play. It does, you know, have some interesting niches. It gets good support moves like Quick Guard, Taunt, and Roar. And then you can kind of put a Z move on the fighting side of its, you know, same type attack bonus, or even if it's Rock side and with Stone Edge and Close Combat, get some pretty powerful attacks out of there. So
yeah, fighting and rock is so, like, the combination of fighting and rock is such strong offensive pressure, but at the cost of very poor defensive typing.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, so that's kind of what you have to do. You got to hit hard and hit quick when you have a Terrakion on your team. But for now, we don't see either of those interesting Pokemon we were just having a conversation about. Instead, Brandon has Tapu Koko and Lunala, and the Nick Navarre has Groudon and Venusaur. I'm sure a lead that he has led countless times over the last couple months.
Oh yeah, and that's a lead that kind of speaks for itself. So really the interesting piece of the dynamic, you know, we know exactly what Groudon's going to do. We know exactly what Venusaur is going to do. Of course, in Sun Series, we saw Lunala a lot of times in this lead did have that electric seed. Of course, it does prefer to run its Z move, but it gets access to all sorts of those support moves with Tailwind, Trick Room, Wide Guard, and any number of things that can really kind of change matchups in an interesting way. So Nick definitely has to be careful about scouting out what exactly its moves are before he goes all in on any of his plays.
Groudon will switch out into the Incineroar, getting an Intimidate off and really being effective for a knockoff in the Lunala slot. A Sludge Bomb into Tapu Koko does not knock it out, and a Nature's Madness. So those two moves combined probably show he might be Assault Vest there, since he's able to live a Sludge Bomb and have room on his slots for Nature's Madness. But here we are, the Lunalium Z. Get used to it, folks. It's gonna.
Lunala from Sun Series to Moon Series has upgraded from 1 laser to 6 lasers, so that's pretty strong. And Incineroar is able to hang on there through that double target. So a lot of resources expended into that Incineroar, what was previously Groudon's slot. And, you know, Brandon really comes away with nothing for his troubles there.
Incineroar is really, like, he really does personify a wrestler. Like, he was in a 2 versus 1 tag team match that turn and still came out.
Yeah.
But, like, still came out living. That's just the power of Incineroar.
And now we're back to kind of a reset of position. Tapu Koko was, like, pretty to stay in, generate some offense there, or support some offense on turn 1, but of course cannot take another Sludge Bomb here. And Venusaur, assuming it has Focus Sash, we didn't see a Life Orb reveal or anything like that. Doesn't really mind sitting in here, even if it has to take a Psyshock and trade its Sash for a knockdown onto Tapu Koko, as it does. I think that's a pretty good trade for Nick here.
Yep, so Tapu Koko will be knocked out, and then the Psyshock from Lunala will bring the Venusaur down to its Focus Sash, as you were saying, remaining with that 1 HP, but now it's up to Incineroar, deciding to just U-turn to break the Shadow Shield, so now a super effective attack from potentially Gengar would be at full power instead of instead of 3/4 of its power.
Right, yeah, I think Gengar would definitely be a pretty good option here for Nick as far as things that can help knock out that Lunala, but really all he has to do is, you know, eventually get back into Incineroar, and will do just fine against that Lunala later in the game. But instead it is Xerneas, so Nick has opted not to bring that Gengar, but really is in a great position. You know, Lunala has already blown its Z move, so all the offense that it could have been threatening onto Xerneas is pretty much gone. You know, definitely the threat of that Lunala with Shadow Shield gone and the item already expended is definitely much less than it was early in that game when Brandon was going all in on that double target in the Groudon slot.
Yeah, and now that Kyogre is on the field, there is no Sun, so Venusaur does not have its Chlorophyll boost, so it's back to that regular speed tier. So it's pretty much going to get knocked out by any attack that Kyogre will want to go for. The question is really the Lunala Xerneas matchup here and what options they want.
Where's Groudon? And there it is.
There it is.
As always, you have to figure out, you know, where is Groudon coming in, and do I have enough on the field to try and punish that switch in? And I think really trying to call where it was coming was, you know, probably something that Brandon would have wanted to do as a Water Spout comes out. And really, you know, we're not really looking at what Groudon's doing right now. That Sun is just offsetting the amount of damage that Xerneas would have taken from the Water
Exactly.
Spout.
So that's really its best job was, even though it took a lot of damage for coming out and eating a Water Spout, the fact that Xerneas is able to stay so healthy that it can Geomancy here and get a +2 increase into its stats for special attack, special defense, and speed is very critical for the rest of this match, because now even Lunala's attack afterwards wouldn't be strong, but he's not attacking, he's just screaming in the general vicinity of Xerneas, and is so shocked that it switches out into the Venusaur with 1 HP. What a great tech with Roar.
Yeah, this is something that we've been talking about since the beginning of the format with Lunala, is it just gets so many moves. And, you know, going into this turn, all that we knew was that it did have Moongeist Beam after seeing that Z move, and we didn't, and I'm sorry, Psyshock. So there were still 2 unaccounted for slots that could have carried any number of moves, and we have seen one of them, and it is Roar. And then all of a sudden, that was just a massive momentum shift, where it was looking like Xerneas was ready to just run through the rest of Brandon's team. And now, you know, it's got no more Power Herb, and this is, you know, an okay position here for Brandon.
Kyogre does switch out here on this turn, though, into Kartana. I was maybe expecting the Kyogre just to go for the Water Spout, since it would have knocked out both of the Pokemon. Obviously now, Incineroar switching in has a little more health than the Groudon's, and so maybe he would have lived on it, but we won't find out for a while. Grass Knot into the Kartana slot will really not do any damage at all because it's ineffective. And Tailwind, that is move number 4, so we can finally write down all of Lunala's moves. And, you know, now for the rest of the set, Nick does not have to play the guessing game anymore.
Yeah, Brandon played his whole hand here over the course of game 1, and it looks like, you know, there's definitely a possibility that he could end up being rewarded for it here. He was able to, you know, definitely shift momentum pretty effectively early on with that Roar, and now that the Tailwind is up, Venusaur is no longer the fastest thing on the field, so it does give Brandon the option to go for a Psyshock or a Moongeist Beam into that slot prior to having to take any sort of attacks from it. So really, you see the power of Lunala, and this is a kind of Lunala that hasn't really up so much Earth format. We've seen a lot of Lunala that are carrying Psych Up on those Xerneas Lunala compositions, but this is kind of like the, we'll call it a toolkit Lunala that was a very prominent, like, mid-Sun format.
Sacred Sword into the Incineroar does not knock it out, but will bring it down very low. Enough for a Moongeist Beam to take down the rest of its HP, as it will be knocked out. So unfortunately for Kartana, it does not get the Beast Boost. Lunala gets credit for the knockout there. The Venusaur still kicking. How many turns has this Venusaur been at 1 HP? Very impressive that it's been around this long. But again, another Grass Knot really not threatening Kartana or Lunala that much at all.
Yeah, and it looked like Nick was really trying to just kind of sack off Venusaur there, and it looks like he went for kind of like a last-ditch shot at catching the Kyogre switch in to the Kartana slot, but instead he misses, and Grass Knot is probably the move that does, you know, the least damage in the game to Kartana, given that it's very light and it 4 times resistance.
Yeah, I think it lays like...
Yeah, it's like a base 20 power, right, as low as it can get. So I wonder if, you know, Nick going for that move with Venusaur, just trying for another Grass Knot, is saying that he doesn't have Hidden Power Fire. I know he was running it at some point in the Sun series. He was running that Venusaur without Protect and Sleep Powder, but now not going for it there definitely makes you wonder about if he has that move on his set.
Leaf Blade from Kartana will obviously take down the Venusaur here with its 1 HP, and now Kartana does have a Beast Boost, so its attack is at +1. The Moongeist Beam from Lunala into Xerneas. Xerneas doesn't have those Geomancy boosts anymore because of that excellent turn that he roared. And now the Moonblast from Xerneas.
But unboosted, definitely not
right, will help Lunala live.
Yeah, and we are down to the last 2 Pokemon as Nick is going to bring his Groudon back onto the field here. And the restricted combo, which can generate a lot of offense in some scenarios, is really just not going to be enough here, as Kartana plus Lunala will be enough to knock out both Groudon and Xerneas here. And that Lunala, Joe, with those the reveal of those last 2 moves, we've seen all 4 now, was definitely instrumental, the key piece in turning around Game 1. First with the Roar to knock out that Geomancy Xerneas, or roar out the Geomancy Xerneas, not knock it out. I'm sorry, that means it's and then
that's essentially what it did, because it became useless after losing the boost.
Of course, and then the Tailwind definitely switching things back in the other direction as well. So we're really seeing the power of that restricted Pokemon and why it's really kind of risen to the top of the depth chart, so to say, as far as, you know, restricted Pokemon here.
What I love about that Lunala set and just team building in general is that Lunala obviously uses Tailwind for its own utility and for how it helps the team, but at the same time, it has Tailwind so that Kartana doesn't necessarily need to hold it, and he's able to have more move coverage. Could it be Smart Strike or a Swords Dancer, whatever 4th slot Kartana wants to have on that is now opened up thanks to the utility of Lunala, and that happens a lot in team building where you have Pokemon with similar move pools. You put that attack on somebody else just to make a different option more viable in matchups.
Right, and I think Lunala kind of does a nice job in that sense, if that's the direction that you choose to go. And we've seen a lot of teams opt to kind of like make it the focal point of their offensive, like their offensive core of their team, but it just gets so many supportive moves, and we saw here that it's still generating a lot of offense. It did a ton of damage to that Incineroar, was unable to knock it out, but the Menacing Moonraze Maelstrom just like will do a lot of damage regardless of whether or not you can still carry support moves, right, and be an offensive piece of the team. So I guess in that sense, it's, you know, a good use of the Pokemon, and we definitely saw its power there in Game 1.
We didn't even really get to talk about Assault Vest Coco and how that Nature's Madness, right, and how that'll affect the set here, knowing it's a little more supportive. He doesn't have to worry about like you know, a super strong Thunderbolt or something, and how Nick can adjust to that. And then, oh, you know, he lived Sludge Bomb from Venusaur, but I don't know how it's gonna hang out with a Gengar Sludge Bomb, which is what we're gonna see on turn 1.
And speaking of Gengar, here we are, and of course Tapu Koko will be able to outspeed Gengar here on turn 1. Unfortunately for Lunala, though, it will not. And I was gonna say, you know, I have no way to prove this anymore, but I really was expecting to see the Gengar as an prior go to Game 2 here because of the problem that Lunala presented, and now Nick has brought, you know, if he is carrying Ghost DMZ as his item, a way to remove it from the field very efficiently. So it's something that Brandon's definitely going to have to play around a little bit more here.
It really is one of those pick your poison situations for Brandon, because either he targets he goes for the Gengar and that leaves Xerneas open, or vice versa. But actually, Gengar cannot go for a Shadow Ball because of Sky Drop from Tapu Koko that will raise it up into the air. Lunala will Tailwind on this turn, doubling the speed, and essentially a wasted from just...
Yeah, and it really gets nothing for it, but there was really not a scenario in which you know, Nick was going to click Geomancy or anything that turn. I guess, you know, in hindsight, he might have been able to get a Dazzling Gleam off or a Moonblast
just to break
to at least bust the Shadow Shield. But I think he was really scouting for like a Nature's Madness. You know, we saw the first turn of Game 1 was a big double target into that slot with the Menacing Moonraze Maelstrom, preceded by a Nature's Madness. And I think that was something he was definitely fearing and was looking to maybe scout out the Z move. And now with Tailwind going up while Skydrop is active, there's kind of some interesting dynamics. Of course, Tapu Koko is going to come down first. and then Gengar will get the opportunity, or I'm sorry, it's gonna be Tapu Koko coming down, and then Lunala would move because the Tailwind is up.
Right.
So that really resets the speed tiers, whereas, you know, prior to Tailwind going up, Tapu Koko would have come down, but then that Lunala slot might have been having to take an attack.
Right, and now the Lunala can side shock that Gengar slot before Gengar would have the chance to Shadow Ball and hit it 4 times super effectively. So an excellent turn 1 played by Brandon here, and you can really see how this team composition has gotten him to 5-0 in Dallas.
Yeah, it's just got so many options and plays that I think, you know, you weren't really expecting, and we saw it with those 2 Lunala reveals in Game 1, and then the Sky Drop plus Tailwind is a really, you know, interesting combination of moves that has been, like, almost uniquely able to offset what Gengar was hoping to do here.
That was a very long time the players were debating on what move to go for on this turn, so Curse Body will make sure that Tapu Koko cannot go for Sky Drop for the next couple of turns here, so we'll have to go for a different game plan. And a Moongeist Beam from Lunala will be into the Gengar, and it didn't even get a chance to have 1 attack in Game 2. Very unfortunate, as we were excited to see what this Gengar could have brought to the table in Dallas, but the Xerneas will go for what it always does, and a Geomancy increasing its special attack, special defense, and speed. Now it is super fast, but the Tailwind is still up, so Lunala and Koko will outspeed it for the next few turns.
Right, they will, and you know, it's always nice to get a free Geomancy, but at this point, it's kind of at what cost? You know, we had to give up Gengar, and that was something that, you know, Nick didn't really have a choice as to whether or not he gave up Gengar. It was just something that really had to happen. And now this Lunala is going to get the opportunity to go for a Psyshock into Xerneas if it wants to, because that Tailwind is active. Fake Out can only go into Tapu Koko at this point. And, you know, Incineroar is a nice Pokemon to have here, but really it's going to be tough because that Gengar was definitely, you know, a pretty big piece of what Nick wanted to do to try and counter this specific lead matchup, and he's just, you know, it's gone before it even got to move.
Right, it really was pivotal, and Brandon was able to understand not only what his win conditions are, or were, but what his opponents are. And that's that next tier of competitive Pokemon when you understand what your opponent has to go for just as well as what you need to do to succeed.
And now it looks like it's going to require some pretty fancy footwork for Nick to try and, it's going to take a lot of like effective calls with that Incineroar, trying to, you know, try and guess what Brandon's doing and then pivot it in and out effectively while still managing the Tailwind turns here. He's actually not going to go for the Fake Out, so this is probably going to be maybe a U-turn or a knockoff from Incineroar, just trying to get anything going here.
Yep, the Nature's Madness into Xerneas will bring it down to half its HP. And here it is, Z-move use number 2 from Lunala in this set, menacing Moonraze Maelstrom. And that's why, you know, it was actually the same situation as Game 1 was the, you know, going for Nature's Madness and then the Z-move here. And even with the +2 boost, I don't know if Xerneas is going to hang around after this one.
I think it should be able to. And it was kind of an interesting play by Brandon there to split his targets, go for a Nature's Madness, and then followed by a menacing Moonraze Maelstrom onto the +2 Xerneas, because it should be able to take this and then, you know, protect next turn, will allow it to finish stalling out those Tailwind turns. And able to hang on with that 9 HP, very close, and Incineroar is able to get that knockoff onto Lunala, and it does knock it out. So Nick is able to pull it back a little bit here, getting a Dazzling Gleam off onto the opposing side, followed by that knockoff, and hanging on through the menacing Moonraze Maelstrom to really give himself a chance going into the late game here. But there is still, I believe, one more turn of Tailwind that he's going to have to contend with, and it seems likely that Groudon is in the back for him, so either Incineroar or Groudon is going to be taking quite a bit of damage from a Water-type attack here.
Right, it seems like even the power, I guess the power or the weakness, whatever glass half full or empty side you're on with Lunala, the power of knockoff through not even having the boost because he's holding a Z move, or the fact that Lunala is just so weak, 4 times weak to the dark, was able to take out around 70% of its HP. And now the Kyogre switches in for free, can double Water Spout, can you know, go for whatever it wants on this last turn, and really get a massive advantage at the end of Tailwind.
Yep, definitely, and Kartana is going to take the field here in favor of Tapu Koko, and it is going to be Groudon that's chosen to take this water spout here, and we saw it do quite a bit of damage in game 1. It's definitely going to be a pretty clean 2-hit KO even in the sun, but Xerneas does have a pretty easy call to protect here, and it's just going to be difficult for it to, you know, generate enough offense on its own here.
Right, especially because, you know, depending on how the Kyogre is trained, it might not be able to endure a +2 Moonblast. You know, most Kyogres do, but if Kyogre is able to just land these water spouts and get a double knockout, then Brandon is looking really good going into the rest of Swiss here.
Right, but he still has a Xerneas to contend with here, and we don't know that Kartana's item, if it is a Salt Nest, that does definitely change the complexion of the end game here, which makes it much easier. Kartana will easily be able to eat up any sort of dazzling gleams that Nick might want to go for, but this is a pretty potent offensive combination that he has on the field, and it seems unlikely that Groudon is going to be able to get an attack off at any point in this game.
Yeah, honestly, the Kartana could just, we saw Sacred Sword, so he could just Sacred Sword to whichever slot he wants, because it would do enough to knock out the Xerneas, and then he would be able to knock out the either Groudon, who's very low, or do a lot of damage to the Incineroar on the switch-in. So he doesn't even have to go for a same type attack boosted attack on this turn. The Tapu Koko will switch into the Kartana slot and eat the Moonblast here for that turn, so now it is not 4 Pokemon left. Leaf Blade from Kartana will
gonna get a shot here.
Will take down the Xerneas. Does he go for a Fire Punch? Kartana's +1 won't matter if he gets knocked out from Fire Punch. No, he went for a Precipice Blaze, but it is single target. Not super effective, but brings it down to its Focus Sash, one of the most forgotten items on Kartana sometimes. Even though it's so effective, it lets it just be pure offense. Don't worry about living any attacks. Hang on, and now he's +1, and now he can actually do some damage as Kyogre switches back out. The rain will be up for the rest of the match, and it looks like Brandon has positioned himself into a victory potentially.
Right, and you know, this could come down.
Well, there is a fake out.
Yeah, there is a fake out, and there are, you know, maybe some ways that Nick can get back into this, and it would kind of involve him calling a Kartana Protect, because I think you have to fake out Kyogre, and then Kartana gets a shot. Actually, you know, I think it actually might take a misplay from Brandon here, because you assume you're faking out. You have to fake out into Kyogre, right? Because otherwise it's taking 2 knockouts. And that does give Kartana the opportunity to go for, you know, basically whichever knockout it wants. And Groudon's actually just going to protect itself here. So a Sacred Sword into Incineroar on this turn could effectively end the game.
There's the fake out into the Kartana. I was thinking Nick might go for that because the fake out into Kyogre was so obvious. So what does Kyogre go for?
Spouts, okay.
Water Spout in the rain will be very strong. Bring Incineroar down to its very... No, actually it was just clean knock it out there.
I think what he was going for there, Joe, is he was hoping that he could catch that Kyogre locking into an Origin Pulse, knowing that it was going to take a fake out and potentially a Precipice Blades at some point, but instead he goes straight for the Water Spout, and that's just going to be the end of the game there. Maybe one more Protect to try and keep Groudon alive for another turn, but an incredibly well-played set by Brandon there, and he just showed off how many tools his team has available, and he was just kind of flexing them over the course of both games. You know, we saw Lunala really take center stage in game 1 with the Tailwind or the Roar followed by the Tailwind, and then all of a sudden Skydrop coming out from Koko on turn 1 in game 2 effectively ended any threat from Gengar and just kind of eliminated, you know, what seemed to be a pretty big part of Nick's offensive game plan as it was going forward, you know, towards that Lunala. And he had, you know, a little bit, maybe a sniff of getting back into the game at some point when he was able to get, you know, Groudon onto the field. He got a Precipice Blades onto that Kartana. And then finally, that Focus Sash was really just kind
of
the
that
dagger,
is my favorite. I fight with so many friends about the best item for Kartana. And I fight tooth and nail, and I say Sash is the best because you don't care about defenses. And, you know, I won that round at least.
There you go. You can use that until the cows come home as, like, pretty much Exhibit A. But that item, you know, we were talking about some of the end games that Nick had